The alien ship descended silently, its smooth surface shimmering faintly under the pale light of the moon. It hovered above the dry expanse of the Nevada desert, a place known for its emptiness and secrecy. The craft was unlike anything anyone on Earth had ever seen, sleek, silent, and glowing with an otherworldly energy. Below, the ground trembled slightly as the vessel settled into position, kicking up clouds of dust that swirled around like tiny storms. At a nearby research facility, alarms blared softly in the control room. A group of scientists rushed to their stations, staring at monitors displaying strange readings. Something big was happening, and it wasn't human-made. Among them stood Daniel Brooks, a physicist who spent most of his days studying nuclear energy and how it interacted with the environment. Beside him was Laura Hayes, a biologist whose work focused on how living organisms adapted to extreme conditions. Both were seasoned professionals, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to face. Word spread quickly through the facility. An unidentified flying object had landed less than 5 miles away. Military personnel were already on their way, but someone needed to make first contact. The decision fell to Daniel and Laura, given their expertise in understanding potentially hazardous environments. They grabbed protective gear out of habit, though neither believed it would do much good if the visitors turned hostile. Still, they didn't argue. This was their job, after all. As they approached the site, the air grew thick with tension. The alien ship loomed ahead, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Its design was sleek and unfamiliar, with no visible doors or windows. For a moment, Daniel wondered if they'd made a mistake coming here. But then, a section of the ship began to shift, melting away like liquid metal until a doorway appeared. From within, tall figures emerged, their forms slender and graceful. Their skin seemed translucent, glowing faintly blue, and their eyes shone with an intensity that made it hard to look directly at them. Laura instinctively took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. Daniel stayed rooted to the spot, his scientific curiosity overpowering his fear. He glanced at Laura and gave her a reassuring nod before stepping forward. One of the aliens moved toward them, its movements fluid and deliberate. It stopped a few feet away, tilting its head as if studying them. "We mean no harm," Daniel said aloud, raising his hand slowly to show he carried no weapons. His voice echoed strangely in the stillness of the desert night. To his surprise, the alien responded, not with words but with thoughts that entered his mind as clearly as if they'd been spoken. "You are humans," came the voice, calm and measured. "We are Valens. We seek knowledge." Daniel blinked, momentarily stunned. Beside him, Laura let out a soft gasp. Telepathy wasn't something either of them had expected. Gathering his composure, Daniel replied, "Yes, we're humans, and you've come to our planet. What kind of knowledge are you seeking?" The Valen tilted its head again, as if considering the question. Then it spoke once more. "We have observed your species working in areas of high radiation without specialized equipment. Such actions defy logic. How is this possible?" Laura exchanged a glance with Daniel. She had studied cases where humans survived brief exposures to radiation, but she knew the risks involved. Without proper protection, prolonged exposure could be deadly. Yet the Valens seemed genuinely puzzled by humanity's ability to endure such conditions, even temporarily. Daniel cleared his throat. "Humans aren't immune to radiation," he explained carefully. "Our bodies can handle small amounts, for short periods, but it's dangerous. We rely on safety measures to protect ourselves. The Valon, its name they learned later was Zinara, seemed intrigued. 'Show us,' it said simply. 'Demonstrate this resilience.'" Daniel hesitated, unsure how to respond. Taking them to a radioactive site wasn't exactly standard protocol, but refusing might provoke suspicion or hostility. After a brief pause, he nodded. "There's an old containment zone not far from here. It's abandoned now, but it still has residual radiation. We can take you there." Zinara agreed, and the group set off in a convoy of vehicles. The drive was tense, with the Valens following closely behind in their own transport. As they traveled, Laura leaned over to Daniel. Do you think this is wise? She whispered. We don't know what they want. They're curious, Daniel replied quietly. That's better than being aggressive. Besides, if we play our cards right, maybe we can learn something from them too. When they arrived at the site, the air felt heavier, charged with an invisible danger. Warning, signs lined the perimeter, rusted from years of neglect. Geiger counters clicked loudly as soon as they stepped inside, signaling dangerously high levels of radiation. Daniel led the way, moving confidently despite the ominous sounds. Laura followed close behind, clutching a small device to collect samples. Zinara and several other Valans watched intently, their glowing eyes scanning every detail. They expected signs of distress, rapid breathing, sweating, trembling, but saw none. Instead, Daniel moved with ease, pointing out various structures and explaining how humans managed to work in such environments. At one point, he paused to tell a story about accidentally locking himself in a lab during a minor radiation leak back in college. Turns out I'm tougher than I look, he joked, flashing a grin at Laura. Laura rolled her eyes but couldn't help laughing. She then chimed in, explaining how human cells contained mechanisms to repair damage caused by radiation. While these repairs weren't instantaneous, they were efficient enough to allow temporary survival in harsh conditions. Zinara listened, closely, her expression unreadable. To the Valans, this concept was revolutionary. Their own species relied entirely on advanced technology to navigate hazardous environments. The idea of biological resilience was almost alien to them. By the time they returned to the vehicles, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The Valans remained silent during the ride back, their minds clearly processing everything they had witnessed. Daniel and Laura, meanwhile, couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter marked only the beginning of something far larger, and perhaps far more complicated, than either of them could imagine. The next morning, the research facility buzzed with activity. News of the Valans' arrival had spread quickly among the staff, though details were scarce. Rumors flew around like wildfire. Some claimed the aliens were here to invade, while others believed they sought help. Daniel and Laura tried to focus on their tasks, but it was impossible to ignore the growing sense of unease in the air. Zinara and her crew arrived soon after breakfast, requesting further tests. They wanted to understand more about how humans could endure radiation without immediate harm. Daniel and Laura agreed, though reluctantly. The Valans seemed genuinely curious, but there was something unsettling about their insistence. It felt less like scientific inquiry and more like an interrogation. Inside the lab, the Valans set up their equipment. Their tools were unlike anything the scientists had ever seen, smooth, glowing devices that hummed softly as they worked. Zinara explained that these machines would scan Daniel and Laura's bodies at a cellular level, searching for clues about their resilience. Daniel lay down on a table while Laura stood nearby, watching nervously as the device hovered over him. The process was painless but strange. Daniel felt a faint warmth spreading through his body, as if sunlight were seeping into his skin. He closed his eyes, trying to relax, but his mind raced with questions. What exactly were the Valans looking for? And what would they do with the information once they found it? Laura, meanwhile, couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She glanced at Zinara, who stood silently observing the procedure. The alien's expression was unreadable, her glowing eyes fixed intently on Daniel. Why are you so interested in this? Laura asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Zinara turned to her, tilting her head slightly. Our species has long relied on technology to survive in hostile environments, she replied. Your ability to adapt biologically is fascinating. If we could understand it, perhaps we could integrate such capabilities into our own biology. Laura frowned. You mean you'd try to change yourselves? Not necessarily, Zinara said. But knowledge is power. Understanding your resilience may open new possibilities for us. Her words sent a chill down Laura's spine. She didn't trust the Valans' intentions, no matter how calm and polite they seemed. Still, she kept her concerns to herself, knowing that voicing them might only make things worse. When the scans were complete, Zinara reviewed the data with her crew. Their reactions were difficult to read, but Laura noticed subtle changes in their demeanor. Some seemed intrigued, while others appeared skeptical. One of the Valens, a tall figure named Kale, spoke up sharply. His voice entered their minds, with a sharpness that made both Daniel and Laura flinch. "This proves nothing," Kale said. "Humans are fragile. Their bodies cannot withstand prolonged exposure to radiation. These results must be flawed." Daniel sat up, irritation flickering across his face. "We never claimed to be invincible," he said firmly. "Yes, we can handle some radiation for short periods, but it's not safe in the long run. You're missing the point." Kale's gaze locked onto him, cold and unyielding. "Then demonstrate it," he demanded. "Prove your claims. Take us to a site with higher levels of radiation. Show us what happens when your bodies reach their limits." Laura stepped forward, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "That's not a good idea," she said firmly. "Higher doses could be dangerous. We're not guinea pigs." Zinara intervened before Kale could respond. "There is no need for hostility," she said smoothly. "We seek understanding, not harm." But Kale raises a valid point. "Your earlier demonstration was impressive but incomplete. Perhaps another test, under controlled conditions, would clarify matters." Daniel hesitated, glancing at Laura. He knew she was right, they shouldn't push their luck, but part of him wanted to prove the Valens wrong. Humans weren't weak or helpless. They had survived countless challenges throughout history, adapting and evolving along the way. Maybe showing the aliens just how far humanity had come wouldn't be such a bad thing. "Fine," Daniel said finally. "But we set the terms. No tricks, no surprises." Zinara nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Agreed." Later that day, the group returned to the abandoned containment zone. This time they ventured deeper into the site where radiation levels were significantly higher. Geiger counters clicked faster, their frantic rhythm filling the air with an almost deafening urgency. Daniel and Laura moved cautiously, aware of the risks involved. As they walked, Zinara and her crew monitored them closely, recording every detail. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Daniel and Laura continued moving, explaining various aspects of the site and how humans typically handled such areas. But as time passed, subtle changes began to appear. Daniel felt a dull ache creeping into his muscles, accompanied by a wave of fatigue. He slowed his pace, forcing himself to keep going despite the discomfort. Laura noticed and placed a hand on his arm. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. "I'm fine," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Just tired." Laura frowned, glancing at the Valens. They showed no signs of concern, their glowing eyes fixed intently on the humans. She realized then that this wasn't just about curiosity, it was a test. The Valens wanted to see how far humans could go before breaking. "We should leave," Laura said firmly, raising her voice so the aliens could hear. "This isn't safe anymore." Kyle stepped forward, his presence commanding. "You claim your bodies can adapt," he said, "yet now you retreat. Is this not proof of your weakness?" Laura bristled at his tone. "It's proof of our intelligence," she shot back. "Knowing our limits is what keeps us alive. Pushing too far would be foolish." Zinara held up a hand, silencing Kale. "Enough," she said. "They have demonstrated enough for today. Let us return to the facility." Relieved, Daniel and Laura followed the Valens back to the vehicles. As they drove away, Laura couldn't help but feel uneasy. The aliens' interest in human biology was growing, and she doubted their intentions were purely academic. Something bigger was at play here, and she feared they were running out of time to figure it out. Back at the facility, tensions simmered beneath the surface. The Valens retreated to their ship to analyze the data, leaving Daniel and Laura alone in the lab. They sat in silence for a while, each lost in thought. "What do you think they'll do next?" Laura asked eventually. Daniel shrugged, rubbing his temples. "I don't know, but I get the feeling this isn't over, not by a long shot." The next day began with an unsettling calm. The Valens had remained quiet, retreating to their ship after the previous day's experiments. Daniel and Laura tried to resume their normal routines, but it was impossible to ignore the weight of what was happening. Every glance out the window toward the alien vessel reminded them that their lives had changed forever. By mid-morning, Zinara returned to the facility, accompanied by 2 other Valens. She requested another meeting, this time in a larger conference room where several human scientists gathered. The atmosphere was tense as everyone took their seats. Zinara stood at the front of the room, her glowing form casting faint shadows on the walls. Her presence commanded attention even though she spoke softly. "We have analyzed your cellular structure," Zinara began. "What we discovered is remarkable. Your DNA contains sequences capable of repairing damage caused by radiation. While these repairs are not instantaneous, they are efficient enough to allow temporary survival in hazardous environments." Murmurs spread through the room. Some of the scientists exchanged surprised glances, while others nodded knowingly. Laura leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "That's not news to us," she said. "We've known about DNA repair mechanisms for years. It's part of why humans can handle short-term exposure to radiation. But prolonged exposure still causes harm. Cancer, organ failure, death." Zinara tilted her head slightly, as if considering Laura's words. "Yes, we understand the limitations. However, the efficiency of your biological resilience is extraordinary. For our species, such capabilities are foreign." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Imagine what we could achieve if we integrated this ability into our own biology." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't like where this conversation was heading. "You're talking about genetic modification," he said bluntly. "That's a big step. Are you sure you want to go down that road?" Kale stepped forward, his expression sharp and unyielding. "Why not?" he asked, his voice cutting through the room like ice. "Your species has already done so. You manipulate crops, animals, even yourselves. Why should we hesitate?" Laura crossed her arms, her tone firm. "Because it's dangerous. Messing with genetics can have unintended consequences. Just because something seems like a good idea doesn't mean it will work out that way." Kale's eyes narrowed. "And yet, your kind continues to do it regardless. Do not lecture us on caution." The tension in the room grew palpable. Zinara raised a hand, silencing Kyle before he could say more. "This discussion is premature," she said calmly. "For now, we seek only to understand. There is much we can learn from each other." But Daniel wasn't convinced. He glanced at Laura, who gave him a subtle nod. They both knew the Valens' interest wasn't purely academic. Something deeper was driving them, and it made Daniel uneasy. After the meeting ended, Daniel and Laura retreated to a private corner of the lab. They needed to talk without being overheard. "They're planning something," Daniel said quietly. "I don't know what, but I don't trust them." Laura nodded, her expression grim. "Me neither. Did you see how Kale reacted? He's not interested in learning, he wants results. Fast. And Zinara isn't stopping him," Daniel added. "She talks about understanding, but she lets him push boundaries. What happens when those boundaries cross into things we can't undo?" Laura sighed, running a hand through her hair. "We need to be careful. If they think we're hiding information, or worse, resisting, they might decide to take matters into their own hands." Daniel frowned. "You're saying they'd force us to cooperate?" "I'm saying we shouldn't rule it out," Laura replied. "They're advanced, but they're also desperate. Desperation makes people unpredictable." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the situation pressed down on them, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "We need to figure out what they really want, and fast. If we wait too long, we might lose control of the situation entirely." Laura agreed. Together, they began reviewing the data the Valens had collected during their tests. Maybe there was a clue hidden somewhere, a hint of what the aliens were truly after. As they worked, they noticed something odd. The Valens scans went far beyond what was necessary to study radiation resistance. They had mapped entire sections of human DNA, including areas unrelated to cellular repair. "This doesn't make sense," Laura muttered, pointing at one of the charts. Why would they care about these genes? They have nothing to do with radiation. Daniel studied the chart closely, his mind racing. Maybe they're looking for something else, he suggested. Something bigger than just radiation resistance. What do you mean? Laura asked. Think about it, Daniel said. If they're studying our DNA so thoroughly, maybe they're searching for traits they can use, not just for surviving radiation, but for adapting to all kinds of environments. Imagine what they could do if they combined our biological resilience with their technology. Laura's eyes widened as the implications sank in. You think they're trying to upgrade themselves, to become more like us? It's possible, Daniel admitted. Or maybe they're planning something else entirely. Either way, we can't let them keep going unchecked. As the hours passed, Daniel and Laura devised a plan. They decided to gather evidence of the Vaylon's true intentions, documenting everything they could find. If they could prove the aliens were up to more than just scientific research, they might be able to convince others to intervene. But they knew it wouldn't be easy. The Vaylons were intelligent and cautious, leaving little room for mistakes. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the facility fell quiet. Most of the staff had gone home, leaving only a skeleton crew behind. Daniel and Laura stayed late, poring over files and notes. Outside, the alien ship loomed in the distance, its faint glow casting long shadows across the desert floor. Suddenly, the door to the lab slid open. Zinara entered, flanked by two of her crew members. She moved with purpose, her glowing eyes locking onto Daniel and Laura. We require additional samples, she said simply. Your cooperation is essential. Daniel stood, placing himself between Zinara and Laura. We've already given you plenty of data, he said firmly. Enough to answer your questions. Zinara's expression didn't change, but her tone grew colder. Your refusal is noted, however, time is critical. We cannot delay further. Laura stepped forward, her voice steady despite the unease bubbling inside her. You said you wanted to understand us. That's fine, but forcing us won't get you answers. It'll only create problems. For a moment, no one spoke. The room felt charged, as if the air itself were holding its breath. Then Zinara turned to leave, her crew following close behind. Before stepping out, she looked back at them. Consider your decision carefully, she said. Our patience has limits. When the door closed behind them, Daniel let out a shaky breath. That didn't feel like a request, he muttered. No kidding, Laura replied. We need to act, and soon. If they come back demanding more, we might not have a choice. The two of them exchanged a determined glance. Whatever happened next, they knew they couldn't face it alone. It was time to bring others into the loop, and hope they weren't too late. The next morning, Daniel and Laura arrived at the facility earlier than usual. They had spent the night going over their plan, rehearsing every detail to make sure nothing went wrong. The stakes were high, and they knew a single misstep could lead to disaster. As they walked through the empty halls, the weight of their decision pressed heavily on them. Their first task was to gather evidence. They needed proof of the Vaylon's true intentions, something tangible that would convince others to take action. Laura suggested starting with the lab's security footage. If the aliens had pushed too far during their experiments, it might be captured on camera. Daniel agreed and headed to the control room, while Laura stayed behind to search for any overlooked data in the files. In the control room, Daniel found what he was looking for almost immediately. The security feeds showed Zinara and her crew conducting scans on human subjects, including himself and Laura. But there was more. In one clip, Kale could be seen adjusting the settings on their equipment, increasing radiation levels beyond what was safe. It wasn't just curiosity driving them, it was recklessness bordering on cruelty. Daniel copied the footage onto a portable drive, his hands trembling slightly as he worked. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. Every second they delayed brought the Vaylons closer to discovering their plan. Once he had the evidence, he hurried back to meet Laura. Meanwhile, Laura had uncovered something equally troubling. Buried deep within the data logs were references, to genetic sequences unrelated to radiation resistance. These sequences corresponded to traits like heightened endurance, rapid healing, and even enhanced cognitive abilities. It seemed the Valens weren't just interested in surviving harsh environments. They wanted to improve themselves in ways that went far beyond survival. "This changes everything," Laura said as Daniel joined her. She held up the printouts, her face pale but resolute. "They're not here to learn about radiation, they're here to steal our biology, to make themselves stronger." Daniel nodded grimly. "And if we don't stop them, who knows what they'll do next? This isn't just about us anymore, it's about everyone." With the evidence in hand, they decided to contact someone outside the facility. They couldn't trust anyone inside, not when the Valons seemed to have such influence. Instead, they reached out to an old colleague of Daniel's named Ryan Carter, a journalist known for investigating government cover-ups. Ryan had always been skeptical of authority, which made him the perfect person to expose the truth. After sending Ryan a secure message detailing their findings, Daniel and Laura waited anxiously for a response. Hours passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Finally, Ryan replied, promising to come as soon as possible. Until then, they had to keep stalling the Valens. When Zainura returned later that day, she wasted no time getting to the point. "We require access to your genetic database," she said without preamble. Her tone was calm but firm, leaving no room for negotiation. Laura stepped forward, forcing herself to remain composed. "That's not possible," she said. "It's classified information, we can't just hand it over." Cale's eyes narrowed, his expression darkening. "You misunderstand," he said coldly. "This is not a request. Your cooperation is mandatory." Daniel moved to stand beside Laura, his voice steady despite the knot of fear in his stomach. "If you try to take it by force, you'll regret it. Humans don't respond well to threats." Zinara raised a hand, silencing Cale before he could retaliate. "There is no need for hostility," she said smoothly. "But understand this. We are running out of patience. Time is critical." As the aliens left the room, Daniel and Laura exchanged a worried glance. They had bought themselves some time, but it wouldn't last long. The Valens were growing impatient, and their next move could be unpredictable. Later that evening, Ryan arrived. He was a tall man with sharp features and an air of quiet determination. After introducing himself, he listened intently as Daniel and Laura explained the situation. When they showed him the evidence, his jaw tightened. "This is bigger than I thought," Ryan admitted. "If word gets out that aliens are trying to manipulate human DNA, it'll cause panic. But keeping it hidden isn't an option either. People deserve to know." "We're not asking you to go public yet," Daniel said quickly. "Just help us figure out how to stop them. If we can prove their intentions are dangerous, maybe we can get the authorities involved." Ryan nodded. "I'll reach out to some contacts. In the meantime, stay safe. These things, they don't mess around." After Ryan left, Daniel and Laura prepared for the worst. They packed essentials and mapped out escape routes in case they needed to flee. The Valens' ship was still parked nearby, its glowing form casting eerie shadows across the desert. It was a constant reminder of the danger lurking just outside their door. The following morning, tensions reached a breaking point. Zinara appeared in the lab accompanied by several armed guards. Their weapons were unlike anything Daniel and Laura had ever seen, smooth metallic devices that hummed softly with energy. The sight sent a chill down their spines. "You have resisted long enough," Zinara said, her voice colder than before. "Hand over the data now, or we will take it ourselves." Laura stepped forward, her voice shaking but defiant. "You won't get away with this. Someone knows what you're doing. If anything happens to us, the whole world will find out." For a moment, Zinara hesitated. Then she turned to Kyle, who smirked triumphantly. "Search the facility," she ordered. "Find what we need." As the guards spread out, Daniel grabbed Laura's arm. "Now," he whispered urgently. They slipped out a side door, moving quickly toward the edge of the compound. Behind them, alarms began to blare as the Valens realized they were gone. Heart pounding, Daniel and Laura ran across the desert, heading for a nearby town where they hoped to find help. The journey was grueling, the hot sun beating down on them relentlessly. By the time they reached the outskirts of the town, both were exhausted and dehydrated. Still, they pressed on, knowing their lives depended on reaching safety. Once in town, they contacted local authorities, explaining the situation as best they could. Within hours, military reinforcements arrived surrounding the research facility. The Valans, outnumbered and outgunned, chose retreat over confrontation. Their ship lifted off silently, disappearing into the sky. As the dust settled, Daniel and Laura watched from a distance, their relief tempered by lingering unease. They had stopped the Valans for now, but they knew this wasn't the end. Somewhere out there, the aliens were still watching, waiting for another chance. And next, time humanity might not be so lucky. The Valan ship disappeared into the sky, leaving behind an eerie silence. The desert stretched out endlessly, its barren landscape now feeling more desolate than ever. Daniel and Laura stood side by side, watching as the glowing craft vanished from sight. Their relief was short-lived, replaced by a gnawing sense of uncertainty. The aliens had left, but neither of them believed it was permanent. Military personnel swarmed the research facility, securing the area and gathering evidence. Soldiers questioned Daniel and Laura extensively, recording every detail of their encounters with the Valans. Despite their exhaustion, they recounted everything: the experiments, the scans, the demands for genetic data, and the aliens' departure. They handed over the security footage and documents they had collected, hoping it would be enough to convince others of the threat. Ryan Carter arrived later that day, his face grim as he reviewed the evidence. "This is big," he said after, listening to their story. "Bigger than anything I've covered before. If people find out about this, it'll change everything." Laura crossed her arms, her expression troubled. "Do you think anyone will believe us? Aliens aren't exactly something most people are ready to accept." "They will if we play it right," Ryan replied. "We start small. Leaks to trusted sources, whispers in the right ears. Once the truth gets out, there's no turning back." Daniel nodded slowly, though his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the image of Zinara's glowing eyes or the cold determination in Kale's voice. "It's not just about exposing them," he said. "We need to prepare. If they come back, and we can't let them catch us off guard again." Ryan agreed. "You're right. This isn't over, but at least now we have time to plan." Over the next few days, life at the facility returned to a semblance of normalcy. Soldiers remained stationed nearby, keeping watch for any signs of the Valan's return. Scientists resumed their work, though many were visibly shaken by what had happened. Daniel and Laura stayed close, knowing they were bound together by what they had experienced. They spent hours discussing what the future might hold. "What do you think they'll do next?" Laura asked one evening as they sat outside the facility, staring up at the stars. "Will they try to come back here, or go somewhere else?" "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But wherever they go, they'll leave trouble in their wake. Humans aren't ready for something like this. Not yet." Laura sighed, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Maybe that's why they came to us. We're resilient, adaptable. Maybe they see us as competition." "Or inspiration," Daniel added. "Either way, it's dangerous. If they start tampering with their own biology using our DNA, who knows what kind of consequences that could have?" As the days turned into weeks, news of the alien encounter began to spread. Ryan carefully orchestrated the release of information, ensuring it reached the right people without causing widespread panic. Governments around the world took notice, convening emergency meetings to discuss how to handle the situation. Scientists debated the implications of the Valan's interest in human biology, while military leaders prepared for the possibility of another visit. Despite the growing awareness, Daniel and Laura knew the real challenge lay ahead. They had stopped the Valans this time, but they doubted it would be so easy next time. The aliens hadn't shown hostility, not outright, but their actions made it clear they weren't above taking what they wanted. One night, as Daniel and Laura sat in the lab reviewing new data, Zinara's voice suddenly filled their minds. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but unmistakable. "Your species is remarkable," she said. "Perhaps there is much we can learn from each other, if trust can be established." Laura froze, her heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Daniel nodded, his jaw clenched. "She's still watching us." The message wasn't threatening, but it carried an undeniable weight. The Valens weren't gone. They were waiting, observing, perhaps planning their next move. For all their advanced technology, they seemed uncertain about humanity, torn between curiosity and caution. "We need to stay ahead of them," Laura said firmly. "If they think we're weak or divided, they'll exploit it. And if they think we're strong, maybe they'll respect us," Daniel added. "Either way, we can't let our guard down." In the weeks that followed, Daniel and Laura dedicated themselves to preparing for the inevitable. They worked with military strategists to develop contingency plans, sharing insights into the Valens' behavior and capabilities. They collaborated with biologists and geneticists, studying the unique aspects of human DNA that had caught the aliens' attention. Slowly but surely, they began building a framework for humanity's defense. Their efforts didn't go unnoticed. News outlets picked up on the story, fueled by leaks from Ryan and other journalists. Public opinion shifted, with many people calling for increased funding for space exploration and defense programs. Governments responded by forming task forces dedicated to studying extraterrestrial threats. For the first time in history, humanity was united by a common goal: survival. Through it all, Daniel and Laura remained at the center of the storm. They became symbols of resilience, proof that humans could adapt even in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet they never forgot the lessons they had learned. Trust was fragile and understanding was rare. If humanity hoped to survive its first contact with an alien species, it would need more than strength. It would need wisdom. Months passed, and the Valens did not return. Some began to wonder if they ever would, but Daniel and Laura knew better. They continued their work, driven by the knowledge that the universe was vast and full of mysteries. Somewhere out there, the Valens were watching, learning, planning, and when they came back, humanity would be ready.